Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar on school improvement grants. We designed this so that if you are solely involved in school improvement or you are solely involved in finances, we can provide both sides of the spectrum with some additional information, specifically on how to begin thinking meaningfully about aligning funds to the web-based targeted improvement plan. And we've also included some more information that's grant related for those of you that might be new or need a refresher on all things school improvement grants. So here is our agenda for this webinar. We will start with some grants need to know information. This is very foundational. So if you are very much involved on the finance side and this is your world, then feel free to skip maybe 5 or 6 minutes in and progress to the other sections of this. Otherwise, if you would love some information on language, abbreviations, budget object codes, kind of the technical and logistics behind it, then feel free to watch that section. Otherwise, we'll move on to the purpose of the web-based targeted improvement plan. There'll be a note on an available resource if you're having some complications when it comes to navigating the web-based targeted improvement plan. And then we'll spend a bunch of time talking about funding sources and some of the challenges that have been presented to us, some examples on how to overcome those challenges, and then also just some ideas on how you can think deeper and outside of the box in terms of aligning funding sources to your tip. All right, so here's our need to know information. Again, if you have a really strong foundation in grants, then maybe fast forward 5 minutes. Otherwise, this section is for all those newbies. Here are some important vocabulary words to kind of ground yourself in the logistics of grants. It's alphabetized alphabetically, so if you need to come back and look at something, then feel free to do so. So when we're talking about an action step, this is specifically in reference to the web-based targeted improvement plan, and this is just a small goal within a larger umbrella of goals that exist in a campus's targeted improvement plan. An ADC is an applicant designation certification. This form is certified, signed, and submitted to TEA by the district or ESC's authorized official. So this could be your superintendent, a business manager, a CFO, something of that nature. And this form, once it's signed and submitted, is going to allow you to have grant access following the submission. Budget object codes are a series of numbered codes that match different funding sources. So you might see 6100, 6200, 6300, and those are going to directly correspond to different pools of money that are available to spend with grant dollars. Things like payroll, contracted services, supplies and materials. Budget summaries, that is a comprehensive outline of where the district or campus or education service center intend to spend their dollars. So you'll see a comprehensive list of the different budget object codes, the amount of funds that have been allocated all on one page. Carryover, some grants allow LEAs and ESCs to use leftover funds from one grant cycle to the next. So if you were awarded X amount of dollars and you did not spend all of them, sometimes there is allowability to use those in the next year. Competitive versus non-competitive. So competitive grants typically require perhaps a narrative piece, and of course, not everybody is going to be awarded that grant. Whereas a non-competitive grant is formula-based, and a lot of times the agency already has a list of qualifying individuals that can apply and automatically receive the grant based on available funds. Direct versus indirect costs. So if you have costs that are pre-budgeted within a grant, meaning you know the amount of dollars you have, you've already set aside amount of dollars for X, Y, and Z purposes, those are direct costs. However, we understand that a lot of times during the implementation of a grant, you will encumber expenses that you didn't think about at the beginning, and those are indirect costs. To draw down funds is just spending grant dollars, and we recommend doing so at least once a month to make sure that money is cycling appropriately. eGrants is a web-based platform that's used for managing grants and compliance reports. ER is expenditure reporting. This is a platform for managing the drawdown of funds, and only certain personnel will have access to this. Federal versus GR. So grants can originate from federal dollars, from general revenue within the state, or perhaps both, depending on the grant, and it just is an indication of where that grant money is coming from. A funding source is aligned to action steps within the web-based targeted improvement plan. And again, that's what we'll be spending a lot of time talking about today. How can we take our action steps and our funding sources and merge those two to think about how dollars connect to our goals? A grant cycle is the life of a grant. So for example, your funds might be available for 1, 2, or maybe 3 school years at a time. ISAM is Intervention Stage and Activity Manager, and this is another web-based platform that's used for monitoring intervention requirements. A NOGA is a Notice of Grant Award, and this is sent to the grant recipient at the time of grant approval. So you'll apply for the grant, you will have that application sent, it will be negotiated, and then once the amount is settled, you'll receive a notification that is your NOGA saying, hey, the funds are available. Plan for Learning, another web-based platform that's used by campuses who are engaging in school improvement to house their online targeted improvement plan. Pre-award costs, again, only some grants allow for pre-award costs. And this means that the grant recipient may be entitled to encumber expenses before they receive their official NOGA. So let's say you apply for a grant in September, you receive your NOGA mid-October. Some grant program guidelines state, hey, you can begin encumbering expenses as of August 1st. And then once you have your NOGA, once those funds are available, you can retroactively make those drawdowns. Local policy plays a large role in this, so just make sure that your school board has also said that that is something that's approved in your district. Program guidelines. Every grant has program guidelines that outline the purpose and regulations of the grant. And then reserve costs. Again, not every grant has these, but it allows the LEA to set aside a % of campus awards for usage at the district level. So perhaps you receive the Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant. You have 5 campuses that have been awarded funds. As soon as that grant is issued to you, the district can cut a piece off the top, cut a percentage off the top, and use that at the district level for grant-related work. Okay, this piece of the section, again, is something that financial representatives of different districts, campuses, and ESCs might want to pass forward maybe 2 or 3 minutes because you probably already are grounded in this knowledge. For those of you that are unfamiliar with budget object codes, here's kind of a general breakdown. So 6100 payroll are pools of money that go to support instructional positions, substitute pay, employee benefits, incentives, and stipends. 6200 is professional and contracted services. Most of these contracted services exist with ESCs as well as other external vendors like vetted improvement partners. 6300 supplies and materials. These are things like textbooks, workbooks, audio visuals, consumables, technology, software licensing. 6400 is other operating costs. This could be in-state travel, conference fees, or training fees. And then 6600 is capital outlay. This one does not get named a lot, but one example could be library media. So some budget object codes have subcategories. So for example, we have the category 6200, you might have a subcategory of 6219. Usage of these subcategories is very rare. And so when you're going into eGrants to fill out your budget summary, the specific naming of fund usage might be required for those subcategories because they require specific approval. But in a general context, you don't need to name every single identified cost because those dollars are being spent within a general pre-approved pool of funds. All right. So now we are to the purpose of the web-based tip. This little tidbit of knowledge is important for those on the financial side of the aisle, as well as strictly school improvement. So hopefully we can begin to ground our conversation and framework on the merging of those two ideas. So Plan for Learning, again, is our web-based platform that campuses who engage in school improvement work are utilizing to submit their targeted improvement plan. But they also have the ability to leverage their grant funds to this web-based tip. And there's two different ways that this is possible. So the first way is simply by customizing your budget summary. So every campus is going to have their dollars inserted into their web-based tip. And that's when they'll be able to designate how many of our campus dollars do we want to spend on things such as 6,100 payroll or 6,200 contracted services, and so on and so forth. The second way that they have the ability to leverage their grant funds is by the specific alignment of action steps to funding sources. And that's the couple of examples that we'll talk about moving forward. A common question that we get is, do we have to align every single dollar to the web-based tip? And the answer is no, absolutely not. That would be a very strenuous effort and would probably be impossible for most campuses, being that there are extenuating circumstances as far as where that funding is being allocated. So it's important to ensure that every single action step within the web-based targeted improvement plan is thoroughly considered in terms of available funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every action step will have dollars tied to it. And it certainly doesn't mean that every dollar must be accounted for. We don't want the web-based tip in terms of grants to be just compliance focused. We want it to provide meaningful opportunities for you to think deeply about how our dollars can support our goals. And so just to name a few examples of reasons why we don't expect the allocation of every single dollar is when you start to consider indirect costs or even reserve costs. Those are things that aren't going to be named in the web-based tip, but we understand that those dollars are accounted for elsewhere, but not within this platform. So in terms of navigating the web-based tip, we do have an additional resource that is available to you guys. We aren't going to spend a lot of time in this presentation going over the logistics and technicalities of navigating through the web-based targeted improvement plan, but we did develop this guide that will help you achieve different tasks and goals within the web-based tip. So if you look here, this is a screenshot of the front page of the guide that we developed called A Short Guide to School Improvement Grants. Within this PDF guide, you'll be able to synthesize Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant information, as well as the ESF grant information as well. The next thing that you'll be able to do within this guide is it will provide you with timelines and important dates of those grant cycles. You'll have an opportunity to practice carryover examples and computing what that looks like. We demonstrate how to navigate the web-based targeted improvement plan through a series of screen grabs. That's what the bulk of this resource is. So if you at the ESC or you have campuses or district level personnel that are having trouble going in and finding certain things or completing certain tasks that are needed to submit the web-based tip, this will take you through most of those action items step by step. And then lastly, it's going to provide some examples of how to link funds to your action steps, which is what we'll also be talking about today, but we have this PDF resource as well. And all of this can be found on the TEA LEA grants website, as well as this link here. Okay, so now for the bulk of what we want to discuss today, and this is how are we going to align action steps to funding sources? And we're going to look at a couple of examples. As we look at these examples, what we noticed when we talked with different region service centers and when we looked at cycle 1 submissions for the targeted improvement plan, we identified 3 common challenges. So the first challenge was that some campuses did not indicate any funding sources whatsoever. The second challenge was that if a campus did indicate they were using a funding source, then it might not have been specific enough, or it might not have aligned appropriately to that action step. And then the third challenge in question form is, how do we address a large upfront cost associated with a year-long implementation? So as we go through these 3 challenges, I'm going to provide some opportunities to think aloud about the language that we see being submitted in the tips and how we can ask some more probing questions to lead and guide campuses into starting to think about how we can align funding sources properly to those action steps. So in regards to the first challenge, remember there was no funding source indicated. Let's use this example and kind of think out loud about how we can address this. So Campus A has selected Essential Action 5.1, which states effective classroom routines and instructional strategies. Their first action step that they put in their targeted improvement plan says, formal training for campus leaders through Region 0. So first and foremost, I'm going to start asking, what's missing? What other probing questions could I ask for more follow-up information and details? And then as I'm getting those answers, how can we begin to think about linking funds to this action step? So the first thing I notice is formal training, and I definitely have lots of questions about that. What is the formal training? Is the training that's being provided, are the goals of that training matching my 5.1 essential action for classroom routines and instructional strategies? Is this training happening on campus? Is it happening at the Region Service Center? Is there a cost associated with that training, or is the service center providing it free of charge? How many teachers am I going to send here? I know it says campus leaders. Could that mean mastery teachers, or could that mean team leads? And if teachers are going, is this going to happen on an in-service day, or is this going to happen on a school day? Because then I'm going to have to start thinking about coverage for my classrooms. And so as I kind of begin to ask a series of questions, I can step back and I can think, okay, so this campus, let's say that they are charging, Region 0 is charging for this professional development. Totally cool, we have funds to cover that. So I'm going to tag a funding source from 6,200 professional contracted services. And it's going to state that we're partnering with Region 0. They're going to provide us with this professional development. And let's say it costs $1,200. Then let's say the answer to the, is it happening on an in-service day question is no, it's going to happen during a school day. And we do plan on sending 4 of our teacher leaders to this training. So if that's the case, then I need to think about coverage for my classrooms. And so I might link another funding source for 6,100 payroll that indicates the amount of substitute pay I'll need to be able to cover my classrooms as my teachers are going to be away. These are some other challenge examples. Feel free to pause the video and talk about it amongst yourself or think before we go over some of the answers. But let's look at example B, and it says that Campus B selects Essential Action 5.3, which is data-driven instruction. And one of their action steps states, teachers will use newly designated PLC time throughout the week to prep assessments and disaggregate data. So when I read that, to me, it sounds like it aligns to their essential action. What I first notice is that it says newly designated PLC time. So I would definitely have some questions on when in the day that PLC time is going to take place. Are they building it into a system that already exists for conference periods? Or again, are we going to have to think about pulling teachers from the classroom? And are we going to need substitutes to cover that missing personnel? And feel free to take a look at Campus C. Our second challenge, this was that maybe funding sources were indicated from the campuses, but they weren't specific or they didn't align to action steps. So let's take a look at Campus C. It says that they selected Essential Action 5.3, data-driven instruction. Their action step links the following funding source. They linked 6,200, which is professional and contracted services. And that is the resources they needed was a full day of PD for 4th and 5th grade math teachers. So again, right off the bat, am I going to need coverage for my 4th and 5th grade math teachers? If so, then I need to link that. How much is my professional development going to cost? Because then I can indicate the funds that are going to be used in 6,200. If we go back up and take a look at Campus A, they select Essential Action 5.1, which is effective classroom routines and instructional strategies. And they link the following funding source, $6,300, which is supplies and materials. And they say they're spending it on data tracker platform and templates, magnets, whiteboard, highlighters, and paper. So all of those are supplies and materials, which means they properly linked them to 6,300, which is supplies and materials. I would be concerned that those necessities maybe don't match their essential action 5.1 classroom routines and instructional strategies. So I would definitely want to follow up on information to make sure that their action step matches their essential action, and then making sure that our funding source got put in the appropriate category. Challenge 3, how do we address a large upfront cost that's associated with a year-long implementation? So we have a lot of words on the next screen, but I went ahead and created a scenario for us to explore as we answer this question. So Campus ABC has contracted with a vetted improvement partner to address lesson planning, classroom routines, and instructional strategies. Their contract states that this improvement goal will be accomplished through 4 school-wide professional development sessions and 12 individual coaching sessions with identified staff. The cost of the contract was $13,800, and it was paid in full on September 15th. So fast forward some, the campus kicked off their partnership with the first of the 4 professional development sessions so that staff could become familiar with the needs of the school and the systems that the vetted improvement partner planned on implementing for their students. This professional development happened in September, and then the other 3 professional development services are going to be loosely scheduled during the other 9 weeks. The individual coaching sessions are going to begin late fall, and they'll carry on throughout the school year as needed. So our question here becomes, or rather a series of questions, how do we allocate funding sources in this scenario? Should we add a $13,800 funding source to the action step that included that first professional development session, since that's when the contract was paid in full? If we do this, are we then going to attach that same funding source to any action step that utilizes the VIP service? And then if we do that, isn't that going to deduct $13,800 every single time? So we run into a series of barriers here on how to address this upfront invoice. However, here is our answer. So your DCSI should be fairly acquainted with the contract for your external vendor, and this individual can assist a campus in determining how each specific action step that utilizes the VIP services can be annotated with a portion of that $13,800 invoice. So for example, let's say that the contract is itemized and we see that every professional development session is $1,200 each, and every individual coaching session is $750 each. This means that in cycle 1, when we did our first professional development session with this VIP, we can go ahead and link a $1,200 funding source. Then in cycles 2, 3, and 4, you can link your other professional development funding sources, as well as the $750 coaching sessions as they appear in various cycles and in various action steps. This is just one way to look at this. Remember, the purpose is to think deeply and meaningfully about aligning our funds and not just linking it all at the beginning and being done. However, if you're in a situation where you do have a VIP that you're contracted with who's providing you with a series of professional development services, if they're all happening in cycle 1, then please link all those funds to cycle 1. Every campus might be in a different scenario. However, if you know from the get-go that these services are utilized throughout the school year, find ways to break down that contract and align funds to different services that are being utilized within different action steps. That way we can see a progression of funding sources as they take place. So here is an example from a targeted improvement plan. And they indicated that they are partnering with lead partners. They have a contract. They've linked it under 6,200 professional and contracted services and have indicated it's $24,000. So this looks great. We've put it in the right budget category. We've indicated who we're contracting with. If you notice in their campus grant funding summary, they have specifically noted that they have 15 days of this consulting contract. So if all of those 15 days of consulting take place during cycle 1, then again, by all means, you can indicate the 24,000 in cycle 1 and be done. If you know that those 15 days are going to be sporadic throughout the school year, then consider breaking down that funding source from 24,000 to 1,600 and assigning them to specific action steps and cycles as they progress throughout the school year. This is what's going to demonstrate a more thoughtful leveraging of your funds in the targeted improvement plan. All right. So another request that was brought to our attention is perhaps ways that we can think outside of the box when it comes to spending your school improvement dollars. I know a lot of this is centered around the idea that some schools have a large chunk of change that they are trying to spend within a grant cycle, and perhaps are getting stuck in the routine of ways that they've spent money in the past and are looking for new ways to integrate dollars in supporting their students on campus. So we reached out to a couple of regions, and we also dug through the web-based targeted improvement plan submissions on our own to find different examples of what districts across Texas have been doing with their school improvement dollars. This is, of course, not mandatory. It is not comprehensive in terms of what is best practice. In fact, we would love for you guys to reach out to us and say, hey, we spent our money this way, so that we can build a more comprehensive list of what you guys are doing with your dollars. But if you need help with a starting point, or you don't know if something's allowable, then feel free to consult this list. And we just took the 3 major categories here: payroll, services, and supplies and materials. So for payroll, it's pretty comprehensive as it is. Payroll, of course, stipends, incentives, substitute pay is always a big one. You might indicate LEA positions, campus positions, or standalone grant-related positions. Some grants will allow for data clerks or perhaps administrative support roles, and those are all usage of 6,100 payroll funds. 6,200 professional and contracted services. Really, there are so many to name here. And if you're interested in finding one of these vendors that you can use under 6,200, feel free to check out the vetted list of improvement partners within the school improvement realm. And then, of course, we always advocate partnering with your region service centers as well. For 6,300 supplies and materials, a lot of what we've seen and has been communicated to us: textbooks and workbooks, technology, audio visuals, data management supplies, like we saw in a previous example. Software licensing is a big one, so subscriptions to educational platforms, materials that you might need to support special populations. So when we think about moving the needle forward for English language learners or for special ed students, there might be a certain series of materials that you need to support those student populations. And then, of course, curriculum resources as well. All right, so that's all we have for you guys in the webinar. Feel free to also look at a short guide to school improvement to revisit some of these examples. And of course, the slide deck will be posted with this recording as well. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Sarah McCaslin at tea.texas.gov, or Alice Keller's information is here as well. We really, truly appreciate your time in watching this webinar, and we're hoping to continue to create resources to start bridging the gap between school improvement and grant funds and kind of merging that so that we can start thinking meaningfully and deeply about the dollars that we have in order to support our students in school improvement campuses. Thanks, everybody.